into your homes for this 15th episode of Esoteric Science Roundtable. This is a live call-in show, and we will be taking calls at about 40 past the hour to discuss today's topic. Today's topic is prayer and invocation. And prayer can be considered, for a definition for prayer, it can be considered as a request, a plea, or a petition. Prayer takes on many forms. It may be silent and internal, or it may be voiced and spoken out loud. Prayer may be an individual effort, or it may be expressed by a group. Prayer starts as aspiration, then becomes devotion, then what we consider prayer may commence eventually to be superseded by fixed intention or contemplation. And this is a basic way to break down the way that prayer initially starts. First, we have aspiration. We have aspiration towards something outside of ourselves, generally. Something that usually when we find ourselves in a bind, or we find ourselves, we've reached our limits and we need an external source of help, we start to aspire. We start to aspire for something outside of ourselves. And then once we've been able to have some sort of response to satisfy us, then we can become more fixed and more devoted, and then actually become so fixed that we reach a point that's called contemplation. And these, if you take them on further, states of bliss, joy, and the term samadhi come into play. And the term samadhi is basically perfect union, perfect and complete union. You as a living entity, being aware that you are intimately intertwined and interrelated with every other living thing, and having that wide, broad scope of understanding to be able to see one's place in the whole vast scheme of things, not losing sight of one's individual efforts, but also keeping oneself in context with the larger picture. And that at its highest point for man would also be called samadhi. Prayer and meditation are the two main ways in which union with the divine can take place. Prayer is a predominant approach in the West. It is a heart approach, or a feeling approach. Excuse me. This is the way of the Occidental mind. The way of the East is meditation. It is a head approach, or a mental approach, primarily, to unite with the divine. And it is considered to be the Oriental method. Meditation and prayer are both paths of union between the human vehicle, with at first the soul, and then later with the will of God. Now, as far as the ideas of prayer and meditation, delineating them between the two, as far as Eastern and Western, things have kind of, as man has progressed and found himself to be more specialized, those delineations don't necessarily hold so true anymore. You find that many people in the States, many people of the Western, from the West, are approaching the return to divinity by meditation, and you find many in the East that have adopted more of a traditional Christian method, and they find their way through prayer. So things tend to get a little bit overlapped and what have you in this day and age. Excuse me. The word yoga comes from the word yug, or yoke. If we can think of the example of an ox joined to the plow by a yoke, we have the basic analogy of the merging of two into one. To paraphrase from the Gospels, some words attributed to Christ Jesus: "Take my yoke, the burden is light and the load is easy." And both meditation and prayer may be considered as forms of yoga. If we can now think of the divine creative process, the laws of nature, what occurs when prayer is practiced? A person or group formulates a plea to something outside of oneself, something greater than man. Man, aware of his limitations, seeks help from sources more aware and more capable than himself. Prayer, meditation, or invocation may be expressed at a specific time, in a group, a congregation, or on an individual basis. Prayer may also be sudden or spontaneous. If we are caught off guard or surprised, we may feel obligated to mumble a few syllables for grace, providence, guidance, or immediate intervention. If you realize at the last second that you're about to be in a traffic accident and you can't do anything to avoid it, you may find yourself making such a request. There are also established prayers and invocations that have been passed down to mankind for their use to unite or merge one's consciousness with the divine and heavenly host. This may be considered in the case of mantras or words of power. If we look to the causes of our manifest universe, we find the originating impulse was the Word or the Logos. Even Christ is described as the Word made flesh. The vibration of the Word magnetically attracts to itself matter, which forms the body or vehicle in which the Word can have existence at the varying levels of evolution contained in our universe. In our voiced expression, we imitate the way that God uses to create. The word of power that characterized the time before Christ was Tao. For our time, it is Om, which has been adopted and adapted to be the root all. If we look to the words omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and even Amen, we can see the origin of all that comes from the word Om. Again, words, when read out loud, set up currents. As the vibration of the words resounds and affects the surrounding atmosphere and environment, this is also the science behind a spell, an incantation, or a magic formula. The cadence, rhythm, or meter of the pronounced patterns holds part of the secret that puts expression into activity. In the Gospels, Christ was asked by a disciple to teach prayer. He replied by teaching those close to him what we have come to call the Lord's Prayer. This prayer has been passed down for over 2,000 years and still has validity for us in our time, as it has been translated from language to language, and it has perhaps lost some of its initial potency, but this has been made more. This has more than been made up for since these many years have elapsed with the strength of numbers. Voices accumulated and aggregated over the four corners of the globe. So we may have lost a bit in the initial translation. The Lord's Prayer, as we read in the Gospels, it was passed down by mouth orally initially from Jesus to his disciples, and then made its way out from there. Excuse me. And we find that again, thinking of words of power and the actual words used, the tone of the words, the phrase, the cadence, the meter, the rhythm used in order to say these words has a specific effect. And even though the original language that we receive the Lord's Prayer in may not be the language that we use in our individual countries as we express this prayer, it still has, over years and years and years of being used, has accumulated energy. It has potency, it has livingness, it has vitality, and we can tap into that pool, if you will, of energy that's been built up over these thousands of years by people in earnest adoration and earnest aspiration that have used these types of prayers, that have been able to make use of this energy so that they can unite their personal self with the divine. And again, this type of prayer is one of many ways, but it is a very valid way, and it's the way that, again, most people in the West are more familiar with. Let's see. Two prayers have been given to humanity through Christ since the advent of his closer interaction with the sons of man. These are the Lord's Prayer and the Great Invocation. They both are fusing, linking, and aligning appeals to the divine. Both these seemingly simple and almost childlike petitions have been overlooked and underestimated because we have not been taught the power behind words to heal or equally to hurt. Possibly, if one has not been able to focus adequately and unyieldingly on the object of one's aspiration or devotion, one has not been able to successfully bring the request into physical activity. One has no way to verify results and may feel that prayer is useless, innocuous, or just a general waste of time. And again, this focus is the key behind any prayer, any petition. Prayer is best if it's a selfless prayer, if it's something that you're asking for, not something for your personal self, but asking for something for others or asking for help in general. Those tend to be the more powerful prayers, although there are definitely plenty of personal prayers if people have struggles in their own lives or they have trials in their own lives that they need a little help and assistance with, and certainly they can use prayer in that respect as well. Excuse me, if one can't discipline oneself to be one-pointed, if the strength of will is lacking or not properly directed, then results will not be accomplished. The energy will be diluted, watered down, ineffective, and will fall short of the mark. Quality of faith is indispensable. If one has no faith or little faith, one needs constant reassuring and constant reminding that God is there, that He has not neglected or abandoned us, as some must surely feel that He has. The faith is the key. And if we were to use a definition of faith, which I've used on the show before, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. Now, if we think about the word substance, something that has substance, something that has weight, maybe weight, matter, what have you, however you want to determine it, something that actually has substance that we can deal with, something tangible to a certain degree. And also, the faith, again, the faith being, let's see, faith also leads to knowing. Faith initially, faith can go through many processes, but once you get to a certain point, faith is not just some vague sensation or some vague awareness. It becomes more of a knowing, more of a solid, concrete, and real, substantial thing in our life. And again, following up on the idea of the evidence of things not seen, I used the example previously of the wind. We may not be able to see the wind, but we can have evidence of things not seen because we can see possibly, things, limbs blowing in the breeze, what have you. We can see the evidence of tornadoes and things along those lines as far as an example of things not seen. And as we become more proficient in this act, from aspiration to devotion to prayer to fixed intention or contemplation, then faith is pretty much the key ingredient to that. We have to have the faith that what we request, what we ask for, will indeed be granted and will find its way into some physical plane manifestation. And so we have to have the focus to see the prayer make the transition from inception to fruition. We have to have full confidence and know that things will work out in accordance with the law. The Lord's Prayer and the Great Invocation link, merge, and align the various kingdoms related to our earth life. If we take a closer look at the Lord's Prayer, we can see this relationship as a foundation for the exchange of energy that is precipitated by this form of request. We find the link between the Father or will with the kingdom of heaven and the eventual establishing of the kingdom of heaven on earth in conjunction with humanity. So if we think a bit about the words of the Lord's Prayer, and it's, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. The intro to that. Okay, again, thinking about Our Father who art in heaven, we have to think about these different lines of this prayer, the Lord's Prayer, as referring to different kingdoms that are related to humanity and related to our earth chain. And so when we say, Our Father who art in heaven, that is the unknowable aspect of God, the will or Father aspect that we can tap into and apprehend to a certain degree, but it is largely outside of the realm of our human perception. Let's see. And as far as the establishing of the kingdom, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, we hear in these words, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, and thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, if we think a minute, what is the kingdom that this is referring to in this particular line? We know we have various kingdoms in nature. We have mineral kingdom, vegetable kingdom, animal kingdom, the human kingdom, and then we have the kingdom of heaven, so-called. The kingdom that is, it's still a human kingdom, but is comprised of individuals who have been able to pass out of just strictly human existence, a more all-encompassing, more aware, more inclusive, and more capable state of existence and being. And this is basically the prototype or the pattern by which we can follow. And this idea is expressed in these words that we were given over 2,000 years ago, as far as thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Now, if we think a bit about the gospel narratives, Christ was really the first one to really emphasize uniting oneself with the Father, with the will of the Father. Not my will, but thine be done. Along those lines, that the as far as the kingdom being established, that this kingdom, again, you can consider it one step higher than the human kingdom, but yet human nonetheless, that the occupants of this so-called kingdom of heaven, which we can also term as Christ and the church invisible, that this is the template for us to be able to follow. And prayer is just the beginning for that long line on the path of return to divinity. Again, there are many different aspects of when one decides to consciously make a return to divinity. There are many different aspects that comprise that whole process. But prayer is definitely one that definitely factors in, and also, again, meditation, invocation. These three are kind of three aspects of one thing in a sense. And so the idea of establishing the will on earth, establishing the kingdom on earth, this is what a lot of people talk about as far as, a kingdom of heaven being established on earth, being established in a situation to where humanity interacts with this fifth kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, intimately, and that the work is merged and joined and united here on our physical plane. Now, to finish up, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now we see the aspect of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit basically mirrored the lower aspect in the last injunction, as far as temptation and things of the physical nature, things that are not going to affect our more higher spiritual aspect, but they do affect us in the physical sense. And the way that the Lord's Prayer is written out, the 7 lines essentially equate to the 7 bodies, so-called, the 7 vehicles that comprise man. And the key is to move our consciousness, our center of awareness, from our lower nature to the higher. And prayer is, again, only just the beginning of that process, as far as ways that we can use in our lives to move forward, to recognize our responsibility, and to have a response in our approach to return to divinity. And again, the 3 kingdoms in nature, so-called, as far as the higher kingdoms that we're concerned with, humanity, the hierarchy, or Christ and the church invisible, and the center where the will of God is known, sometimes referred to in the East as Shambhala or Shangri-La. And that also goes to show, just like the term Om, as far as how that has infiltrated our consciousness and our thinking, even in the West, in our mainstream thinking. You hear it on movies and TV, and you hear it so often, it tends to lose a little bit, because people don't tend to take it so seriously anymore. It's lost the high, sacred, spiritual, impetus that it originally had, and it's kind of been diluted and lessened a bit. On the one hand, it's kind of good that it's kind of infiltrated its way, these kind of terms, into the mainstream, but also, by the same token, it's kind of watered them down to the point where people, they hear the term Om and they just they may laugh even. They may think it's a bit comical because they hear it in so many different contexts. They don't think of it as the original spiritual tool, a word of power, that it originally was intended to be. And they, by virtue of that, they don't understand what they can do to help use a prayer like that. Now, another prayer that I want to discuss is the Great Invocation, which I have previously talked about on the show as well, and it has only been available for use by humanity since 1945. This prayer, according to someone, was passed down. It was in use by the hierarchy, by Christ and the Church Invisible, and it was a prayer that they used. And as far as humanity being able to join in and to make use of this prayer, we have only been able to make use of it since 1945. And again, that is owing to the point of evolution that humanity has reached, that we can now be entrusted with such words of power of such magnitude, of such weight, that we can be entrusted finally to help share in this greater work. And it's a long time coming, and again, we've only really been had access to this particular prayer for about 50 years, roughly speaking. And again, following some of the esoteric tradition that describes that this prayer initially was used by the hierarchy, and it's important to keep in mind that it still is used by the hierarchy, and that also, if we have any understanding of the hierarchy, if we can think of it as, some people are going to think of it as a theoretical, possibly maybe, some people think of it as an accepted fact. At any rate, if we can think about how this works in conjunction with the hierarchy, how prayer works as far as aligning, as far as relationships between these different kingdoms, and how, again, it helps to align them, to bring them together, to have a better, clearer, straighter channel for this exchange to take place. Again, the Great Invocation holds much potency and potential for the release and exchange of energy between humanity, the hierarchy, and the will of God, or as I've termed it previously, Shambhala. Invocation is a scientific process by which an individual group calls down or invokes a source outside and appeals for assistance. It is yet to be acknowledged as the powerful tool that it is. And again, some people may think prayer is useless, or invocation is useless, that it doesn't have any real effect on things. But once we get to understand more about thought and how thought does move things, and how, as a quantum physicist would say, energy follows thought. So if we think of thought, we set up currents, so to speak. We set up the conditions that allow that thought to carry out into fruition, into meeting the ends that we're thinking of. If we're thinking of, going out to get a snack or something like that, then, carrying out to make sure that those means are accomplished. And that can be on the, as mundane a level as, like I said, using that as going to get a snack, or the higher levels of trying to find a approach to divinity. Its dissemination seeks to accomplish several things, among which are: 1, an outpouring of love and light upon mankind from Shambhala; 2, an invocatory appeal to Christ, the head of the hierarchy, to reappear among men; and 3, the establishing on earth of the divine plan of expression and evolution that humanity can accept and cooperate with willingly. And that's a key thing too. Any cooperation on the part of humanity has to be of our own volition, of our own free will. There is no forced servitude in this instance as far as trying to make a return to divinity. And that's why there still are so many different paths of return to divinity, through the organized churches, through various organizations, and just the individual approach of someone just staying at home possibly and just finding their own personal system of belief. They take on many different forms, and they all have their right and proper place depending on each person's experience and what have you. Certain modes of expression are going to be more proper for certain individuals, and it's up to us to decide which scenario is best for us. If we find that we are able to attain a more substantial return to divinity through an organized religion, then that's perhaps the way we should consider going. Otherwise, some people, they stay in the organized religions and they find that they've maybe outgrown them, if you will, or it just no longer holds an appeal to them for whatever reason, and they have to find their way to some other alternative source. And we see that happening quite a lot. By one token, you have people returning to the church in larger numbers, young people and what have you, and people in general, really, they're trying to find something in their lives and find their way through this whole maze that we're immersed in. And then you find people equally leaving the churches in large numbers too, because they find that they can't get the types of satisfaction, the words that the preacher may be preaching or what have you, or the congregation just doesn't seem to fit them anymore, so they have to move on to something different. Some esoteric tradition states that each day at sunset, Christ stands under the great pine in his garden with hands uplifted in blessing to all who truly and earnestly seek to aspire. And also, once a year at the June full moon, Christ represents humanity for what has been called the Festival of Goodwill or World Invocation Day. And this is not very well known really at this point in time as far as the mainstream, but it's becoming increasingly so. And that may be a point of a problem or contention for some folks out there as to the origin and the alleged origins of the invocation, the Great Invocation. People are comfortable with the Lord's Prayer because they find it in the Holy Bible, and so that's something that it's tried and true and trusted for them, and so that they really don't dispute it, they just accept it. Although in many cases, as I've said previously, the power that it initially had has been lost because people have forgotten how powerful those words actually are. But some people may have a bit of difficulty, with the idea of where the invocation came from and that sort of thing, and why didn't it come through this church or that church, or why didn't this person bring it out, or what have you, and why isn't it more well known right now? Really have to kind of get past those kind of things and just accept it for the useful tool that it is, the powerful tool that it is, and understand that we truly can work with prayer and invocation to affect change. Very definitely can affect change. And the more you add to it, again, in the Bible it talks about 2 or more people agreeing on something and asking for something, it's more likely to be granted, these requests, because you have the multiplicity, you have the numbers, and there is strength in numbers. It's a mob that's out of control and they're looking to lynch somebody. The numbers have strength, and thought is a real thing, and as the masses choose to think, so things change. And that's something that the average person can't grasp. They can't grasp that this thought plus this thought plus this thought plus this thought on down the line equal a large force of thought, and that can be a large moving force to accomplish things. The use of the Great Invocation between Christ, hierarchy, and humanity simultaneously releases much energy and anchors light, love, and power to our physical earth. Basically, we form a triangle, so to speak, between the will of God, or Shambhala, the hierarchy, or Christ and the Church Invisible, and average humanity. Those 3 aspects make up a triangle, an interlinking triangle of interconnected energy. And if we think about that to the next step, as far as rotating fields, that's the beginning idea for a rotating field. Once you have a geometric shape rapidly rotating, then you have a very potent vortex of energy. And it's the same concept in the 7 centers in our body, in the lesser centers. It basically, if we could look at it, if you could see the light that comprises our centers, you would see rapidly rotating geometric shapes that comprise our centers. And that, again, is the same concept with our interrelation between, again, the will of God, or Shambhala, the hierarchy, or Christ and the Church Invisible, and humanity. We form this aligning link, we form this connecting channel, if you will, between these for this flow of energy to take place. Now we have to also consider that the flow is 2 ways. Initially, God created our universe and created our planet and created the life in it and created the template and the pattern for things in our physical existence that basically mirror things in the heaven. And so as that divinity immerses itself into matter and becomes manifest in all of the diverse things that we see around us, the different minerals, plants, animals, and the different races of humans on the planet, and all the different various life that we see teeming throughout the universe, we see how it becomes differentiated once it does come into manifestation. And then the goal is for that matter, imbued and filled with spirit, to refine itself and to make a return on an ascending arc, so to speak, on a return to divinity. And so that we take that initial impulse that came down from the creative process that filled this whole universe with all the different forms that we know, and that these forms, once they become more aware of their interconnectedness and understand how divinity relates to humanity or their varying forms here, that we can make a conscious return to divinity, that it's part of our will, our job, if you will, our duty and obligation to find our way back to divinity. Now, certain people are going to do it at a certain speed, and other people are going to do it much more rapidly. And also, there are ways with which you can, and tools that you can use to speed up the process, so-called. Now, again, prayer and invocation would be two ways of that. Meditation as well as a way. Again, a meditation being a union, being a yoga, a yoke, a union between the physical and the divine. And that these are the methods that we can use to expedite the process. We can just go along our daily routines and just, just live our lives, and evolution will take its place. Or we can act upon it consciously by an effort of the will, and we can move ourselves. We can increase our vibratory rate. We can do many things that will make us physically closer to the divine. And so as we become more aware, as our consciousness expands, we can apprehend more of the divine, and we can understand more intelligently our place in the whole scheme of things, and how also we can intelligently work with this process of creation, how we can form a part of it, and a conscious part of it. And we can make our wills one with the will of God. Not my will, but thine be done. Let's see. Now, these words of power, when you think of the words of light, love, and power, when you hear these words, they have real substance. When we think of light, love, and power as real things, not just words, but they really have substance. They really are real things, and they really can set up conditions. And as light and love and power anchor themselves through this triangle of interrelated energy, as this energy makes its way back down to the planet and is anchored back to the planet, then we have a reservoir, so to speak, from which we can draw, and we can use this energy. And this, basically, this energy, you can think of it as a big cohesive, uniting force that we can tap into to work for the serving of the race. It's at our disposal, basically, if our approach is earnest and selfless. Now, this grouping of words, the Great Invocation, very carefully translated, can achieve much. It offers a potent tool for directing force and exchanging energy if we have faith and confidence that it will. And again, the idea that we have to have faith. Faith is the key. Faith is the cornerstone to anything. Again, I talked earlier about aspiration. We have to have aspiration towards the divine, or longing for the divine, something outside of ourselves. But we also have to have faith that that response will be fulfilled and granted and requested. Faith is always the key. Now, as far as one country I can bring up that has seen evidence demonstrated through prayer and meditation is China. The Falun Gong movement was at first commended by the government. People by positive thought, and Falun Gong is basically a method of meditation, contemplation, and actually physical exercise, somewhat like Tai Chi, if you're familiar with the moving of Tai Chi. And that all ties into this practice known as Falun Gong. And at first it was commended by the Chinese government because the people were very healthy in the Falun Gong movement, and so they were saving the state money, and they were commended initially. But then shortly afterwards, it became thought of as subversive and undermining the power and authority of the state, and was quickly outlawed. Its practitioners forced to go underground and hide their activities, or succumb to prison, torture, and enslavement. Really, the only way you can publicly practice Falun Gong in China these days is like some folks did, by setting themselves on fire in Tiananmen Square by self-immolation. That's the only way you draw attention to Falun Gong in China these days, because it's been clamped down on so hard. Now, why would a country be so adamant and so against a peaceful form of meditation, people getting together, something that's benefiting their health? It's a state of mind. It's helping them with their well-being and overall positive attitude. You would think that somebody like that would be a more capable contributor to the society. But just the opposite. The Chinese authority, the state, looks on it as an infringement on their what they consider to be a legitimate power structure. And anything that threatens that, they will crack down on with an iron fist. And they do it in full daylight. They don't do it. They don't choose to be subversive or underground in it. They are very, very above ground and in your face as far as their efforts they have taken to crack down on Falun Gong. And it just goes to show you the power that people have by just thinking, collective thinking, and then group thinking along the same lines. How intense and how much that can change things. Again, Falun Gong being a very good example. And it's also alive in this country as well. And if we can understand how thought can really move, we can work together to solve some of our problems here in our own country, in our own environment. And also, as far as that goes, we are more connected these days. And just like in the idea of the World Trade Organization's meetings and some of these kind of meetings, you get hundreds of thousands of people, average citizens, amassing on these meetings, and they really just have one simple demand, let us know what's going on. Get rid of the secrecy, get rid of the unaccountability, and let us be part of this process. We all have a part to play in the economic system, you know what I mean? We all contribute, whether it be a small amount or a large amount, but we all are part of that process. And this just goes to demonstrate how a group of people getting together can affect change. And it's something that you don't have to necessarily go to another country or another city to be in a rally. If we can just understand the power of thought, how powerful, truly powerful thought is, if we can be one-pointed, if we can move forward one-pointedly with our thought, then we can make a difference. We can change things. And that's just that's one example. There are many examples of how energy moves thought. How energy follows thoughts, and how things are changed as a result of that. Again, sufficient numbers can make the difference. The beauty of mass prayer and invocation is that one can pray anywhere at any time. You don't have to get up and go somewhere or do something. It is simply a thought, a directed, focused exercise of the will that can be employed from the comfort of one's own home, but has to have focus and direction to carry it forward and to sustain it until it finishes the work it was sent out to do. And this is how we can make change, and through focused, unyielding, unwavering group effort. And if we can all come together a bit on these ideas, we can make some real progress and stop thinking along camps of, well, I'm this or I'm that, or I'm part of this movement or I'm part of that movement. We're all part of the human movement, and the sooner we understand the ideas of goodwill and right human relations towards our fellow men, then we can begin to make some real progress. It has to start with our initial thought, our thinking process. But we have to aspire, we have to devote ourselves to this process. If we don't have any desire for it, then we certainly won't have it. But if people can stop being so materialistic and so selfish, just to minor degrees, if they can just alleviate some of that selfishness and start to think more inclusively on a small, and more so, from your immediate area on out, and branch that thinking, that inclusive thinking out, then we truly can affect change. And that is what those that wish to enslave us are quite afraid of. There are those that use these same methods as far as manipulating public thinking through advertisement and through propaganda and things like that we've seen evidenced over thousands of years as well, that there are those opposing factions that want to also limit our free expression, limit our mobility, and they use these exact same methods that I'm describing as far as a mental approach, as far as using thought, putting thought into motion. And they do that by manipulating our thoughts in many instances, again, through advertisement or what have you, that you find them manipulating and basically putting thoughts into our heads and making us think a certain way, thinking that we need to have a certain kind of car, or maybe we need to dress a certain way, or any of those kind of things that, that aren't necessarily true, but you hear it enough times, sometimes you tend to believe it. And that's, again, if we can think of the power of prayer, prayer is so powerful that if we can only have faith that it does have that power, and if we could only have faith that there are others out there feeling the same way that we are all in our individual areas of the world are all thinking along these lines as far as goodwill, right human relations, and what can be done to have a true one humanity where we're not divided by racial issues, wars, politics, all of these things that we are constantly propped up as barriers for us as far as being able to come together and be one humanity. We keep being stifled, but we can find the ways, if we can work together, to make some real progress. And prayer and invocation are just some of the basic stepping stones to take that we can start with. That again, it doesn't take a tremendous amount of effort. It's something that we can do in the comfort of our own homes, and we can make real change because numbers add, and add and add, and that collective thought becomes public opinion. It becomes mass consciousness, and we can move forward collectively using that power, that force, to change things for the good, for the better of the many, as opposed to just for the select privilege of the few, the way that it is in this day and age. And I would like to take the opportunity here just in a minute to put up the Great Invocation and to say the Great Invocation, because again, it is a world prayer that it has a lot of strength. And if people out there would consider joining me in saying the invocation briefly, and focusing, also if we can focus on some of these world problems, some of the ideas as far as the racism and some of these things of the dividing issues, if we can try to think of, when we use the invocation, think of getting past the dividing and getting into aligning. That's the key, getting into an alignment. And if I could say the invocation briefly and ask folks out there if you would please visualize alignment, visualize the aligning of the kingdoms in nature, humanity, hierarchy, and Shambhala, and also the aligning of human will towards betterment, towards good will and right human relations. And if I could start from the point of light within the heart, within the mind of God, let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center which you call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out. It may seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Again, this is a prayer that is very powerful. And Chris, you can go ahead and take that off now. Thanks. If anybody's interested in having a prayer of their own, I'd be more than happy to send them out completely free of charge, their own personal copy of the invocation. Again, as I said, the Lord's Prayer is relatively well known, so you can find that in a lot of places. This prayer is still becoming more known on a world scale, but again, keeping in mind that Christ himself and the hierarchy, or Christ and the Church Invisible, still themselves use this prayer often. That merging, that alignment between these varying kingdoms can be that much more, much more solid, that much closer, much more of a real substantial thing. And also, Chris, if you wouldn't mind momentarily putting up the phone number so we can possibly start to have any feedback on this subject, the idea of invocation and prayer, and how thought, energy follows thought. With our thought, we can truly move things. And I've spoken before about the ideas of maybe bending a spoon or something like that. People use this exercise of the will, this energy, in various ways. But ultimately, if we could truly understand, again, with these, with the world prayer or any words of power, so-called, that if we can truly understand and truly have faith that we can, that things will be accomplished, we can make a lot of progress. And I really can't emphasize that enough. As far as different varying factions coming together and making use of something like this, a tool like this, that's something that can be common, and frankly, it is very common. The Great Invocation is used by many of the other world's religions. It's used equally by Hindu, Buddhist, Islamic, Christian, what have you, because everyone is looking forward to the return of a world teacher. Well, not everyone, I should say, but many participants in all the great world's religions are looking forward to a world teacher, and many people have different conceptions about it and different ways and they think that might pan itself out and work itself out. If we use a tool like the invocation, we can, by using these words of power, we can express our own individual visualizations in conjunction with these words. And again, I have to point out that these words were carefully chosen and carefully translated for maximum potency, if you will. They definitely have, by virtue of the order that they're in, the rhythm, the cadence, the meter, everything that went into translating this prayer for us to use. It has purpose. There's purpose behind it. There's order behind it, and that type of order is what allows us to make use of the power behind this type of prayer. And again, going back to the idea of a spell or an invocation, some kind of ritual or ceremonial situation where you find somebody, using these words in a certain way, and yeah, I'm sure you've seen that portrayed on television, in the movies, many times, where they start invoking something, and then currents set themselves into effect, and all of a sudden things start happening and getting kind of crazy. And normally it's shown in a negative way, as far as a demonic possession or unleashing some force that's been tucked away for a really long time and it should never have been tapped into, and it should be laying dormant, but yet somehow somebody's invoked it, if you will, called it up into being, and then we have to face it. And also, as far as the idea of the Indians chanting in the sweat lodges, and the dances and the chants that they would use as far as bringing rain down, or and that sort of thing. There's a definite cadence, a definite rhythm to both the chant and the accompanying dance that goes along with it. The motion that goes along with it is all tied in, and that also shows the antiquity of prayer and invocation and this type of ceremony affiliated with all of this. It's been around for a really long time, and that varied cultures make use of it. It's not just strictly a Christian thing. It's not strictly any particular religious dispensation. The idea of an invocation or a prayer or a vocal approach to divinity is all pervasive. It's in many cultures, and it goes far back into antiquity. Again, the idea that it's and on all these things, when you add them up, when you add the rhythmic cadence of the voice along with the steps involved with the dance, it just accumulates. And then when you add numbers, more people doing it simultaneously, then it tends to add even more at that point, and accumulates and builds up even more by virtue of numbers. And also, as far as the idea of the interrelation and alignment that takes place, if we think about ourselves as humans, and also various other kingdoms, they do all have their interrelations. We as humans have our responsibility to the lower kingdoms in order to nurture and bring them up, and then the higher kingdoms have a sense of responsibility to us to inform us and to help us to make this approach to divinity. And it is a scientific process. I can't emphasize that enough, that there is a science behind this whole movement, and there's a science behind sound, the whole idea of sound setting up vibrations, causing movement. And anybody can demonstrate that very easily just by speaking and maybe placing your hand up, and you can see that that you can feel on your hand the breath. It's very simple, but that goes even further than that. It's much more sublime and much more complex than that, in the sense that the voice, the breath, the vibrations set other currents into motion. They set up a chain reaction, so to speak, and then events follow that initial thought. And so again, energy follows thought. Listen, if I do have a call, so I'm going to chat with him and see what's going on. Hello, caller?
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
I've been reading about the fourth way, and I'm not sure if you guys speak on that much, but just been trying to get a little bit of an understanding of it, and was wondering if it was related to any type of Christianity. I am Christian.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar with
the fourth way? I can't say that. Is it something of a Native American?
Kesdjan?
I'm sorry?
Kesdjan is spelled Kesdjan.
Okay, that sounds like the folks that actually put on an Access show, if I'm not mistaken. The guys that put on the Gurdjieff Hour.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I watched their show a couple of times, and I find that I agree with a lot of what they say. I've even touched upon a few topics and few analogies and comparisons that I've heard them make as well that are very common amongst this type of way of thinking, of philosophy, or what have you. So in that sense, I don't actually have any Gurdjieff or Opensky books myself personally, but I think I would find them, they would appeal to me, and I would be able to get something out of them. I think it's kind of unfortunate that those guys aren't doing more work and doing more shows. It'd be nice if we could have more people doing this type of thing down here at Access. I know that they also do their the body worker shows where they demonstrate how to do massage techniques and what have you. So it seems like they are doing their service. They're trying to help folks out. So I can definitely commend them for that. But as far as the specifics of the teachings, I can't say that I really am that familiar with them.
Okay, well, thank you. You've
Thanks.
clarified that.
Okay, thanks. Have a nice evening. Thank you for your call. Let's see here. Okay. And again, talking about words of power or mantras, and to revisit the idea of the term Om. Om, the root Om, we could consider that meaning all, everything, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, just all pervasive, encompassing everything. That is the idea of God, and that it is everything, and that by using words of power, we can assist in our approach of return to divinity. That even the word Amen has its basis in Om, and that's vibration that's set up as a result. Let's see here. Now, taking into consideration the idea of a prayer, a request, or a plea, one thing that is important to keep in mind is what passes these days for prayer in a lot of people's minds is not really what was originally considered as prayer. A lot of people will only pray when there's difficulty, when they're having trials and tribulations. That's when they remember how to pray all of a sudden. Something tragic or traumatic causes them to have their return to divinity. And that, in every instance, is not a bad thing. Sometimes it takes that spark or that, some kind of action to act on us in order to move us forward so that we can ourselves find some kind of path to a return to divinity. But many, many people are very occupied when they pray, if they do pray, with trying to glamorize yourself, to try to pray for something for themselves. And that's not always necessarily bad. If you're praying and say you want a new car or something like that, well, if you desperately need transportation, you need to get from point A to point B or what have you, or if you're handicapped or something along those lines, certainly, then you're going to those things are going to be a blessing to you. But so many times, in so many instances, they've abused prayer in my estimation because they use it as a selfish tool to try to accomplish something for themselves only, and that's where they have shortcomings. Now, that's not necessarily, again, these prayers are oftentimes answered as well, and sometimes we get more than we bargain for, and that also ties into the whole idea of be careful what you ask for. Some even have said, some old philosophers have even said that only the wise should pray because they know what man is lacking. Some of them felt that the less evolved people would only pray and only petition for things for themselves. They wouldn't have the grasp, the capacity to understand the big picture, and so they wouldn't be able to pray and petition for something on a larger scale. And that's quite unfortunate. But again, prayer has kind of degraded to a low state in this day and age. And if we could rediscover the power of prayer and the power of group prayer, we could make a lot of moves forward as a race collectively. Let me go ahead and take another call and see what's going on. Hello, caller.
Yes, I just previously called, and sorry for the feedback, but I was just wanting to touch on something you just mentioned as far as the power of prayer.
Sure, go ahead.
Once, when I was really troubled as far as feeling that I was surrounded by so much
Negativity,
yes, and devilish ways, if you mind. But I asked God to show me these things and point those things out in my life, sincerely. Well, ever since then, I've had a change of mind. It
Hello, caller? Hello, caller? Sorry, I think I lost you. Are you there?
Yes.
Go ahead and finish.
Everything it's so apparent. I can see it all so much differently now that I've asked for it, and it's overwhelming that God can do something like that to my life.
True, that's true. But again, you had faith. You had faith that if you made that appeal, that if you aspired towards something outside of yourself, that you would find that request granted. And again, not everybody is able to have the discipline to make that manifest itself in their lives. And I'm very happy to hear that you were able to use that to change something in your life and to make a negative into a positive. And hopefully you'll be able to continue along those lines as far as strengthening yourself and hopefully helping to make your will in line with the will of the divine. And it's an ongoing process. It's a daily process. It's actually a minute-by-minute process if you want to break it down to where we have to if at all possible, be constantly aware and keep at the forefront of our thinking, that divine idea, and to check ourselves, if you will, at every turn, so that we are not saying things that harm other people, thinking stray thoughts, and that we kind of have some discipline in our lives. And prayer is also part of discipline. If we cannot discipline ourselves to pray, we're not going to find any luck with it. But if you have that discipline, if you have that one-pointed directedness of mind, then you will find more often than not that that power is a real power, and you can make use of it. And you can be a channel for that power. And I am very, very happy to hear that you've been able to make some progress in that area. Is there anything else that you care to add?
No, thank you. And I just wanted to say that all you do have to do is really sincerely ask, and it will be done.
Absolutely. I couldn't have put it any better myself. Thank you very much for that call. Take care. Hello, caller.
Oh, yes. I was going to talk about prayer in schools.
Go ahead.
All right. I'd just like to say, hail fucking Satan!
All right, buddy. Thanks for that comment. Now, again, see, that's somebody that's expressing limitation. That's, it's all fun and games for them, and they probably don't have any real sense of the real power behind prayer. If you, Satan. Well, Satan is a force, so to speak, if you will. I don't really necessarily think of it as a specific entity, but there are people that choose to put their aspiration, their devotion in that direction. Many people, I think, at the highest levels actually are in that same boat that feel that way. Obviously, well, I would feel like this guy is just, trying to be clever, trying to impress his friends, trying to impress his mom, that sort of thing, and that's all fine and good. But there are people that take that to the extreme, and that is a lifestyle for them, that they do lead an evil life, and they're selfish and they're materialistic to the utmost extreme that we can't even imagine how extreme. And that's a problem that people have. The average person, they cannot, in their minds, comprehend that some other human could be quite that evil, quite that just a bad person, evil, if you want to use that term. You can't fathom that. We can't comprehend it, and that's why people can't get to the fuller realization that there a lot of times are things going on behind the scenes that are very sketchy, and that there are those that wish to enslave us, so-called, as I choose to term them, that are working behind the scenes to limit our free expression, limit our free will, limit our mobility, but we can counteract that kind of thinking. We can counteract that negativity, and we can move forward through prayer and through group thought and through our collective consciousness. If we can move forward, that's very key, very important for us to be able to do that. And again, the power of prayer, I cannot emphasize enough. That's basically, again, the theme of the show is prayer and invocation. And in the waning minutes of the show, I cannot emphasize enough the power of prayer. Prayer does have power. If we only have faith, the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, that it will be granted. It's not a tricky thing. It's something that each of us can formulate in our own ways, in our own minds, in our own hearts. It's really up to us as to how we choose to approach it. Again, there's formalized prayer, and there's informal prayer, and there's group prayer, and there's individual prayer, and it exists at many levels. But we can make use of it, and we can improve ourselves. We can all move forward collectively if we just have the inclination to do so. And I'd like to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to encourage all of you folks out there to stay tuned for Chris of Thanos and the Reality Expander TV show coming up shortly. And I'd just like to say, hey, Austin, thanks a lot for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you folks again next Tuesday, live at 8 o'clock here on Channel 10. Thanks, Austin. Take care. Have a good night.